The 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood remains one of the most unusual automobiles of its era, a car that combined flamboyant styling, experimental features, and bold marketing with the bittersweet role of being Hudson's final chapter. In this hour-long episode, we'll explore 35 little-known and fascinating facts that reveal why this short-lived model has become both a historical curiosity and a hidden gem among collectors. Fact number 35. Collector's Secret Star. For decades after its quiet farewell in 1957, the Hudson Hornet Hollywood was largely forgotten, overshadowed by flashier Chevrolets, Fords, and Chryslers from the same year. Yet in the collector car world, this overlooked hardtop has slowly transformed into a kind of secret star. Its rarity, eccentric styling, and peculiar features like tritone interiors, reclining twin travel seats, and mini tail fins make it a car that sparks fascination whenever one turns up at a show. Because fewer than 800 Hollywoods were ever built, surviving examples are known almost individually among Hudson enthusiasts. Owners often share records and provenance, tracing their cars back through decades of careful preservation or lucky barn finds. Unlike mass-market classics where thousands remain, the Hornet Hollywood exists in such small numbers that each car carries its own folklore. A single survivor with original tritone paint or factory-installed air conditioning can become a celebrity in Hudson circles. What makes the Hollywood such an odd collector's piece is that it was mocked in its own time. Critics dismissed its chrome-heavy design and confused identity, but today those very quirks are what make it valuable. At a car show filled with endless 57 Chevys, the sudden appearance of a Hudson Hollywood stops people in their tracks, prompting questions and stories. Enthusiasts often describe it as a conversation car, one that may not win awards for beauty, but always draws a crowd. Museums have also begun to recognize the Hollywood's odd charm. Institutions like the Ypsilanti Automotive Heritage Museum proudly display one, emphasizing its place as the very last Hudson ever built. For collectors, this blend of obscurity, rarity, and historical finality gives the Hornet Hollywood a mystique that other 1950s cars can't match. In the end, the Hollywood's eccentricity is its greatest strength. Once dismissed as an ungainly swan song, it has become a secret favorite among enthusiasts who cherish the overlooked corners of automotive history. Fact number 34. Unique serial numbers. One of the strangest and most obscure details about the 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood lies not in its chrome, paint, or engine, but in its serial numbers. Hudson, like other manufacturers, assigned model codes to its cars, but the final year's coding carried an eerie significance. The Hollywood hardtop carried the model designation 5787 with an added 2 suffix identifying the two-door hardtop body style. On paper, it looked like nothing more than an internal cataloging system, but for Hudson historians, it became a kind of automotive epitaph. The very last Hudson ever built, a Hornet Hollywood, rolled out of Kenosha with the serial number 35,787-2. That string of digits, meaningless to the average driver, is now treated almost like a tombstone inscription by collectors. It confirmed not only the body style, but also the series, trim, and sequence of production, allowing enthusiasts to trace the precise identity of Hudson's final swan song. In the world of vintage cars, few brands can point to a specific serial number as the line in the sand between existence and extinction. What makes this particularly weird is how little attention it received at the time. To AMC, it was just another number on another car rolling down the line. But in hindsight, that unique serial marking has become a vital artifact, giving Hudson's final chapter an exact endpoint that historians can document. Unlike brands that faded gradually or were absorbed without fanfare, Hudson left behind a very specific numerical signature for its finale. Collectors who own surviving 1957 Hudsons often obsess over their serial tags, comparing them against known records to see where their car fits in the final run. A Hollywood with a late series number carries extra bragging rights as it sits closer to the historic final car. It's a strange twist of fate that something as mundane as a string of digits has become one of the most powerful links to Hudson's end. For the Hornet Hollywood, its unique serial numbers were not just factory paperwork, they became the final proof of life for a disappearing brand. Fact number 33. Heavyweight construction. The 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood carried an air of luxury and flash, but one thing it could not escape was its sheer bulk. Thanks to its unit body construction, heavy use of steel, and layers of elaborate chrome trim, the Hollywood tipped the scales at around 3,800 pounds. That made it heavier than many competing Chevrolets and Fords of the same year, despite being marketed as a slightly more compact luxury car. In effect, Hudson's swan song was something of a heavyweight fighter wearing a sequined costume. The weight gave the car undeniable solidity on the road. Drivers often remarked that the Hollywood felt planted, with little of the body flex or rattles common in other cars of the 1950s. Combined with its wide stance and low step-down seating position, the Hornet delivered a ride quality that felt closer to a high-end Buick than to a struggling independent brand's offering. For long highway cruises, the weight was an asset, smoothing out bumps and giving passengers a cushioned experience. Yet that heft also blunted the performance promised by its new 327 cubic inch V8. On paper, with 255 horsepower, the Hollywood should have been a genuine performer. In reality, the engine had to work hard to move nearly 2 tons of steel and chrome, making the car slower off the line than lighter competitors. The irony was sharp. Hudson finally had a modern V8, but the very body it was bolted into robbed it of the chance to shine. Today, collectors view this heavyweight nature as both a blessing and a curse. It means that surviving Hollywoods are often sturdier than other cars from the same era, but it also makes them less nimble and thirstier on fuel. In a way, the car's excessive weight became a metaphor for Hudson itself. Solid, overbuilt, and impressive in its presence, yet ultimately too heavy a burden to keep pace with the changing automotive world of the late 1950s. Fact number 32. Luxurious but doomed. The 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood was, in many ways, a contradiction on wheels. On one hand, it was among the most luxurious Hudsons ever built, offering buyers features like tritone paint, elaborate interiors, optional air conditioning, reclining twin travel seats, and power conveniences. On the other hand, it was a car that had no real future, the last gasp of a brand already marked for extinction. This odd mix of extravagance and desperation makes it one of the strangest cars of the 1950s. Hudson had once been the champion of value and engineering prowess. By 1957, however, AMC leaned heavily into flash to try to disguise the fact that the Hornet Hollywood was essentially a restyled Nash. With its shimmering aluminum side panels, padded dash, and flamboyant 3-color interiors, the car looked like it belonged in a Hollywood movie set more than on suburban driveways. It was designed to lure buyers into believing Hudson still represented glamour, even as its production numbers and dealer networks collapsed. The tragic irony was that these luxuries came at a cost. A fully loaded Hornet Hollywood could cost nearly as much as a Buick or a low-end Cadillac, yet carried none of the prestige or stability of those brands. Buyers who might have stretched for such luxuries often preferred to spend their money with the big three, leaving Hudson showrooms quiet and unsold cars gathering dust. In short, the very extravagance that AMC hoped would save Hudson only made it harder to sell. Today, this paradox gives the Hornet Hollywood its peculiar charm. It was luxurious enough to stand out, yet doomed by its timing and identity crisis. Collectors now see it as an artifact of ambition colliding with reality, a brand trying to shine brightest just as the lights were going out. The 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood remains a symbol of a company that dressed up for the ball, only to find the party was already over. Fact number 31. Hollywood name's last hurrah. The Hollywood name had always carried a certain glamour within Hudson's lineup, reserved for its pillarless hardtop coupes that were meant to evoke style, leisure, and West Coast sophistication. First introduced back in 1949, the Hollywood designation was Hudson's way of saying that this was not just another sedan, it was a car with flair. But by the time the 1957 Hornet Hollywood appeared, the name was taking its final bow. The irony was thick. In its last year, Hudson doubled down on chrome, tritone paints, and flashy details, trying to make the Hollywood live up to its star-studded name. Yet behind the glitter was a car built on Nash bones, assembled in Kenosha, and sold in numbers so small that many people never even saw one new. The Hollywood badge promised glamour, but the reality was a brand in decline, fighting for relevance in a market dominated by Ford, Chevrolet, and Plymouth. What makes this detail strange is that AMC never reused the Hollywood name after Hudson's demise. When the Rambler, Rebel, and later AMC models arrived, the Hollywood branding was gone, left behind like a stage set after the show closed. It was as if the word itself had been retired along with Hudson, frozen in 1957 and never spoken again in the context of new cars. In an era when names like Bel Air, Fairlane, and Fury lived on in memory, Hollywood became a forgotten relic tied to one brand's final act. Today, the rarity of the Hornet Hollywood gives the name a ghostly aura. Collectors see it as a reminder of Hudson's last attempt to sparkle, even as the lights were dimming. The fact that the Hollywood moniker ended with Hudson adds to the car's mystique. It wasn't just the end of a model, but the end of a glamorous nameplate that could have lived on. In this sense, the 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood was truly the Hollywood name's last hurrah, closing the curtain on both a model and a marketing idea that never got a sequel. Fact number 30. Marketing Hudson as luxury compacts. By 1957, American Motors was facing a branding crisis. 5. With Hudson and Nash both fading fast and Rambler emerging as the company's strongest product, AMC tried an odd marketing experiment, repositioning Hudson as a kind of luxury compact. This was a strange pivot because the Hornet Hollywood was not compact by any means. It was a full-size car with a wide interior and hefty curb weight. Yet in AMC's attempt to carve out niches, Hudson was quietly marketed as the more upscale alternative to the growing Rambler line. The weirdness becomes even clearer when you look at specific export markets. In South Africa, for example, AMC actually rebadged the Rambler as the Hudson 108, a bizarre move that essentially erased Hudson's identity while keeping the name alive for recognition's sake. This meant that, depending on where you lived, Hudson could mean a flashy Hornet Hollywood coupe or a rebadged compact Rambler. The lack of consistency confused customers and diluted the brand even further. Domestically, the marketing leaned heavily into chrome, comfort, and tri-tone color coordination, as if to prove that Hudson was still a luxury name. But the prices of well-equipped Hornet Hollywoods pushed them dangerously close to Cadillacs and Buicks, which left many buyers wondering why they should pay so much for a car from a brand that might not exist the following year. The strategy of luxury compacts was AMC's way of trying to justify Hudson's existence without giving it a unique role in the lineup. In hindsight, this strange marketing identity only hastened Hudson's demise. Buyers didn't know what Hudson stood for anymore. Was it performance, luxury, compact efficiency, or flashy design? By stretching the brand across conflicting messages, AMC undermined the Hornet Hollywood's chance to shine. Today, this attempt to sell Hudson as a luxury compact is remembered as one of the oddest branding moves of the 1950s, a desperate effort to keep a dying mark alive by reshaping its image into something it had never been. Fact number 29. No 1958 Hudsons. Almost. The 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood carried not only the weight of being the last Hudson produced, but also the burden of representing a brand that just nearly, lived on into 1958. What makes this fact so weird is that American Motors originally had plans for a new generation of Hudsons, and prototypes were actually built with 1958 styling cues and Hudson badging. These pre-production cars wore a reworked version of the AMC Ambassador body, complete with unique grills and trim intended to give them a Hudson identity. For a brief moment, it seemed like Hudson might survive after all. But somewhere between design and launch, AMC's leadership made a fateful decision. The company realized that supporting three separate brands, Nash, Hudson, and Rambler, was spreading resources too thin. Rambler, the compact that had started as a side project, was rapidly gaining traction with buyers looking for economy and practicality. So, in mid-1957, AMC quietly pulled the plug on both Hudson and Nash, deciding to focus entirely on Rambler going forward. The result is that 1958 Hudsons technically existed, but only as engineering mules and prototype cars that never reached dealerships. A handful of period photographs survive showing what these cars look like, essentially ambassadors with different grills and emblems. Had they been produced, the Hudson name would have entered the era of square-cut late 50s styling, but history chose otherwise. This near miss gives the Hornet Hollywood an even stranger legacy. It wasn't just the last Hudson sold to the public, it was the last Hudson period, because the follow-up never made it past the prototype stage. Collectors sometimes debate whether to consider the 1957 Hornet Hollywood a true finale or a penultimate step toward cars that AMC simply decided not to release. Either way, the fact that Hudson was only a boardroom decision away from surviving into 1958 makes its actual demise all the more haunting. The Hollywood wasn't just the end of an era, it was the car that stood on the edge of what almost was. Fact number 28, the last Hudson was a Hollywood. The story of the Hudson brand ends with a very specific car, and fittingly, it was a Hornet Hollywood. On June 25, 1957, the very last Hudson ever built rolled off the assembly line at the American Motors plant in Kenosha, Wisconsin. There were no television cameras, no press releases, and no ceremonial send-off. Workers simply finished assembling a Hollywood hardtop, inspected it, and sent it out as just another car. For a marque that had once been a leader in racing, engineering, and style, the quietness of this ending felt surreal. Only a few years earlier, Hudsons had been winning NASCAR races and selling in healthy numbers. By 1957, it had come down to a single Hollywood coupe, one of fewer than 800 built that year, carrying the honor and the weight of being the final Hudson. In a way, it symbolized the decline of the independents in post-war America, when smaller brands couldn't keep up with the massive production and marketing power of the Big Three. What makes this moment especially strange is how forgotten it was at the time. Many Hudson dealers didn't even know that the last car had been built, and AMC executives were already focused on promoting the Rambler. The Hornet Hollywood that closed the book on Hudson history wasn't preserved immediately, it was just sold like any other car. Only later, when collectors realized the significance, was the last Hudson saved and eventually placed in the Ypsilanti Automotive Heritage Museum in Michigan, where it survives today. For enthusiasts, this final Hollywood has become more than just a car, it is a monument. It represents not only the end of Hudson, but also the end of an era when smaller automakers could challenge giants with bold engineering. That the very last Hudson was a Hollywood hardtop, dripping in chrome and color, seems oddly fitting. It was both flashy and fragile, a symbol of ambition and decline, closing the curtain on nearly half a century of innovation in the most unceremonious way possible. Fact number 27. Right-hand drive export models. While the Hudson Hornet Hollywood was already a rarity in the United States, it becomes even stranger when you look at what American Motors did for its export markets in 1957. In a little-known twist, the Hornet Hollywood was actually assembled in right-hand drive form for countries such as South Africa, New Zealand, and parts of Europe. This meant that one of the rarest American cars of its era was made even rarer by being flipped to suit driving on the opposite side of the road. These right-hand drive cars were often produced from knockdown kits that were shipped overseas. Local assembly plants would piece them together, which kept tariffs lower and allowed AMC to maintain a presence in foreign markets despite its shrinking fortunes at home. For buyers in those regions, the Hornet Hollywood must have been an astonishing sight, a flashy, tri-tone, chrome-laden American coupe standing out against the more modest British and European sedans of the day. What makes this fact so odd is the sheer effort required to engineer a right-hand drive setup for a car that sold in such tiny numbers overall. AMC had to rework the dashboard, the steering column, and other controls to accommodate the mirrored layout. Considering that fewer than 5,000 Hudsons of all types were built in 1957, the number of right-hand drive Hollywoods was likely in the double digits, making them almost mythical today. Collectors who have stumbled across one of these export models often describe them as holy grails of Hudson history. Not only are they among the last Hudsons ever built, but they also represent a peculiar global footprint for a brand that was all but extinct in its homeland. Seeing a 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood with the steering wheel on the right side feels almost surreal, a reminder that even as the brand was dying, it was still trying to hold on to an international presence. These cars are so scarce that many Hudson enthusiasts go their entire lives without ever seeing one in person. Fact number 26, even rarer custom models. As rare as the 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood hardtop was, the custom trim level takes that rarity to another level entirely. Out of the 749 Hollywoods built, only about 483 were finished as customs, leaving the rest in the more modest super trim. This means that barely more than half of the already tiny production run received the extra luxury touches that distinguish the custom series. The custom models were easy to spot thanks to details like the textured aluminum side panels, upgraded upholstery with tri-tone fabrics and optional leather, and more elaborate chrome detailing. Inside, they offered finer fabrics, metallic thread cloth inserts, and better padding, giving them an upscale feel that the supermodels lacked. Buyers could also choose bolder tri-tone paint combinations, making the custom Hollywoods the most flamboyant cars Hudson had ever built. In essence, the custom package was Hudson's last attempt to project an image of prestige. What makes this weird is that so few people actually ordered the upgrade. By 1957, the Hudson name carried little prestige in the marketplace, and buyers were hesitant to pay Cadillac-level prices for a car from a brand they suspected might not survive. Many who still wanted a Hudson settled for the cheaper Super, meaning the custom Hollywoods were produced in vanishingly small numbers. Today, that scarcity makes them incredibly desirable among Hudson collectors. Finding a genuine custom Hollywood with its original aluminum panels and tricolor interior intact is like finding a hidden treasure. Because reproduction parts for these trim pieces are almost non-existent, most restorers must salvage original components, adding to their mystique. In many ways, the custom Hollywood represents the last gasp of Hudson as a maker of luxury-leaning, detail-rich cars. With fewer than 500 ever built, it stands today as one of the rarest and most unusual production models of the 1950s, both a symbol of Hudson's ambition and its decline. Fact number 25, rare Hollywood hardtops. If the total production of the 1957 Hudson Hornet was small, the numbers for the Hollywood hardtop were microscopic. Out of just over 4,000 Hudsons built in that final year, only 749 of them were the glamorous Hollywood two-door hardtops. That made the Hollywood not only rare at the time, but practically invisible on American roads, where the vast majority of Hudsons sold were the more practical four-door sedans. The Hollywood hardtop had always been Hudson's attempt at adding glamour to its lineup, carrying a pillarless roofline that evoked the sleek styling of Cadillacs and Buicks. In 1957, however, it was a tough sell. Buyers flocked to Chevrolet Bel Airs, Ford Fairlanes, and Plymouth Furies, all of which offered more dramatic styling and higher production visibility. Against those competitors, the Hornet Hollywood looked like a niche choice from a fading mark. What makes this detail fascinating is how it elevated the Hollywood into an accidental collectible. Because so few were built and fewer still were preserved, every surviving Hollywood has become an automotive oddity. Unlike the mass-market hardtops from the Big Three, the Hudson's rarity has turned it into a car that even seasoned enthusiasts might never see in person. At shows, it often sparks the same surprised reaction. I didn't know Hudson even made a hardtop in 1957. For Hudson loyalists, the Hollywood carried special symbolism. It was the brand's final attempt to produce something glamorous, a stylish coupe that tried to hold its head high even as the company collapsed. The low production meant few ever got to experience it when new, but today, that scarcity makes the Hollywood one of the most talked about curiosities of the 1950s. It is an irony of history that the very model meant to bring Hudson attention ended up being built in such tiny numbers that it became almost invisible. Yet that very invisibility is what gives it intrigue today. Fact number 24, tiny sales numbers. If the 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood is remembered for anything beyond its styling quirks, it is the shockingly small number of cars that were actually built. In total, only about 4,108 Hudson Hornets of all body styles left the Kenosha assembly line in that final year. For comparison, Chevrolet sold well over 1 million cars in 1957 alone, making Hudson's numbers look more like those of a boutique maker than a once proud American brand. The breakdown tells an even stranger story. Of those 4,000 or so cars, the majority were four-door sedans, leaving the glamorous Hollywood two-door hardtop as a rare sight, even when new. This meant that in many towns, buyers might never have even seen a Hollywood in person. Dealers struggled to move what little inventory they had, and many showrooms sat quiet, with only a handful of cars on display, a stark contrast to the crowded lots of Ford and Plymouth dealers. What makes this fact especially weird is how far Hudson had fallen in just a few years. Back in 1951, Hudson had sold more than 43,000 Hornets, buoyed by NASCAR victories and its reputation as a performance leader. To tumble from tens of thousands of sales to barely 4,000 in only 6 years was almost unheard of in the industry. It wasn't just decline, it was collapse. For collectors today, those tiny numbers have turned the Hornet Hollywood into a rarity by default. Surviving cars are few, and each one has become a prized curiosity, often known by name within Hudson circles. Unlike mass-market cars from the same year, the 1957 Hollywood exists in such low numbers that it feels more like an exotic import than a mainstream American model. Its minuscule production run is both a badge of tragedy and a source of fascination, ensuring that this flamboyant oddball remains one of the rarest swan songs in Detroit history. Fact number 23. Production at Kenosha. By the time the 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood was built, the company's production had already left its Detroit roots behind. Instead of rolling off the lines at Hudson's historic Jefferson Avenue plant in Michigan, the Hollywood was produced entirely at American Motors factory in Kenosha, Wisconsin. This shift was not just logistical, it symbolized the final erasure of Hudson's independent identity. Hudson's Detroit plant had closed in 1954 after the merger with Nash, forcing all subsequent Hudson-branded cars to be built alongside their Nash counterparts. In Kenosha, the Hornet Hollywood shared assembly lines with the Nash Ambassador, and in many cases the two cars were practically identical until trim and badges were added. This unusual arrangement meant that the very last Hudsons were born on the same line as their corporate cousins, blurring the distinction between the two once proud marques. What makes this fact so fascinating is how anticlimactic the end really was. On the last day of Hudson production in 1957, there was no ceremony, no final parade of cars, and no acknowledgement of history being made. Workers simply watched as a Hudson Hornet Hollywood rolled down the same line as the last Nash, then clocked out for the day. A brand that had won NASCAR titles, introduced groundbreaking engineering, and inspired fierce loyalty faded away quietly on the factory floor. Today, the Kenosha connection adds a bittersweet layer to the Hornet Hollywood story. Enthusiasts often note that the car was Hudson in name only, a Kenosha-built cousin to Nash that carried just enough unique styling to keep the badge alive for one more year. The Kenosha plant itself would go on to play a huge role in AMC's future, producing Ramblers, Javelins, and eventually even Jeep models. But for Hudson, Kenosha was both a lifeline and a tombstone, the place where its final cars were built and where the curtain quietly closed on nearly half a century of history. Fact number 22. Wide step-down interior. The 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood might have borrowed much of its body from the Nash Ambassador, but it still carried forward one of Hudson's proudest engineering legacies, the wide, low step-down interior. Since 1948, Hudson had built cars with a recessed floor pan, allowing passengers to step down into the cabin rather than climb up into it. By 1957, this design had evolved into an unusually spacious layout that gave the Hornet Hollywood one of the widest interiors of any American car. Advertisements proudly declared that the front seat was the broadest in the industry, wide enough for 3 adults to sit comfortably without crowding. The design also gave the car a lower center of gravity, which contributed to its reputation for stability and smooth handling. This low seating arrangement meant the roofline could be sleek while still providing generous headroom, something most competitors struggled to achieve. For buyers, the effect was subtle but striking. The Hollywood felt like a roomy lounge, with broad cushions and plenty of legroom, even if the car wasn't as long as some of its rivals. What makes this interior particularly quirky is how it emphasized flatness. Thanks to AMC's torque tube design, the Hollywood had very little of the driveshaft hump that plagued most rear-wheel drive cars. The result was a nearly flat rear floor, making it more comfortable for a third passenger and adding to the sense of openness. Combined with the reclining twin travel seats, the Hollywood offered one of the most versatile cabin layouts of the 1950s, part sedan, part living room, part rolling bedroom. Collectors today still marvel at how solid and roomy these interiors feel compared to other cars of the same era. While the flashy tritone colors and chrome fins attract attention on the outside, it's the wide step-down interior that truly captures the spirit of Hudson's engineering heritage. It is an odd juxtaposition, a car mocked for its styling excesses but respected for its comfortable, innovative interior design. In many ways, the spacious cabin was the Hollywood's hidden strength, even if most buyers of 1957 were more focused on tail fins than on seat width. Fact number 21. Unit body construction. One of the most quietly impressive aspects of the 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood was something you couldn't see at first glance: its unit body construction. Long before unibody became the industry standard, Hudson had been a pioneer in building cars without a separate frame, starting with its famous step-down design in 1948. By 1957, under American Motors, the Hornet Hollywood carried on this tradition with what the company marketed as double-safe single-unit construction. Unlike most cars of its day, which were built body-on-frame, the Hollywood structure was a welded unit that integrated the floor pan, body, and chassis into one solid shell. This gave the car extra rigidity, reduced squeaks and rattles, and created a lower center of gravity. Hudson had once used this engineering to dominate NASCAR, as the step-down unibody made the cars handle like oversized sports sedans. Even though the 1957 Hollywood was heavier and flashier, it still carried that DNA, giving it a smoother ride and a surprising sense of solidity compared to many of its rivals. What makes this fact especially odd is how little Hudson emphasized it by the end. Earlier advertising in the 1940s and early 1950s bragged heavily about the step-down unibody design, but by 1957, AMC seemed more interested in pushing chrome trim, tritone paint, and V8 power. The engineering that had once made Hudson a household name was overshadowed by styling gimmicks and borrowed Nash parts. As a result, few buyers in 1957 realized they were still getting one of the most structurally advanced cars on the market. Today, this construction is one reason why surviving Hornet Hollywoods can still feel surprisingly tight on the road. Unlike body-on-frame cars that often sag or twist with age, the Hollywood's unibody holds its shape better, making it a sturdier survivor. It's an ironic twist. A car mocked for its fins and grille was quietly carrying engineering that wouldn't become mainstream until years later. In many ways, the unit body construction was Hudson's last reminder of its engineering brilliance, hiding beneath the flamboyant exterior of its swan song coupe. Fact number 20. No park, odd start. Perhaps one of the quirkiest engineering details of the 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood was its unusual relationship with the transmission and ignition system. Unlike modern cars, or even most of its contemporaries, the Hollywood's flash-away Hydra-matic came without a park position. Instead, the gear selector had only reverse, neutral, drive, and the lower gears. To secure the car when parked, drivers were expected to rely solely on the emergency brake or leave it in reverse, a practice that feels almost alien to drivers today. But the real oddity was the starting procedure. To fire up the Hollywood, the driver didn't just turn the key. The ignition key switched on the electrical system, but the actual starter engagement was tied to the transmission lever. You had to put the selector in neutral and then pull it toward yourself, which would trigger the starter motor and crank the engine. In essence, the gear shift doubled as the starter switch, making it a kind of built-in safety interlock system decades before such things were standardized. For newcomers, this was baffling. Someone unfamiliar with Hudson or Nash practice might sit there turning the key endlessly, wondering why the engine wouldn't start. Even seasoned mechanics sometimes forgot the sequence, giving the Hollywood a reputation for being temperamental when, in reality, it was just unconventional. Hudson had inherited this quirky design from Nash, which had used it earlier in the decade, and AMC decided to retain it rather than redesign the system in Hudson's final year. Today, this odd starting ritual is one of the most charming talking points when a Hornet Hollywood shows up at a car show. Owners love demonstrating the secret handshake, showing how the car refuses to come alive unless you know the trick. It's a weird little quirk that perfectly encapsulates the 1957 Hollywood, an automobile both ahead of its time and hopelessly stuck in its own eccentric habits. In many ways, this peculiar ignition system is as much a conversation piece as its tritone paint or chrome finlets. Fact number 19. Flashaway hydromatic transmission, 0.5. Another odd detail about the 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood is hidden in its drivetrain. It came equipped with the flashaway hydromatic transmission, a 4-speed automatic sourced directly from General Motors. Hudson had no transmission of its own by this point, so AMC simply adopted GM's proven hydromatic and rebranded it with a flashy name to make it sound unique. The result was a surprisingly sophisticated automatic for its era, one that gave the Hollywood smooth acceleration and reliable performance, even if most buyers never realized it was borrowed technology. The hydromatic had already been used in Cadillacs and Oldsmobiles, so Hudson was able to claim that its cars now carried the same advanced gearbox found in far more prestigious brands. The marketing term flashaway was meant to emphasize quick, effortless takeoffs, suggesting that Hudson was keeping pace with Detroit's big names. And to be fair, the system was rugged, with 4 forward speeds at a time when some competitors only offered 2-speed automatics. For long highway cruises, it gave the Hollywood a refinement that matched its emphasis on comfort. What makes this especially weird is how the transmission was integrated into Hudson's quirky starting procedure. Instead of simply turning a key, drivers had to place the selector in neutral and then pull the lever toward themselves to engage the starter motor. It was a system inherited from earlier Nash and Hudson models, and it baffled anyone unfamiliar with the brand. To modern drivers, the absence of a park gear and the strange startup sequence feel almost alien, as though the Hollywood was designed with its own secret handshake. Collectors today often laugh at the flashaway branding, noting that it was essentially a GM hydromatic dressed up with a Hudson nameplate. Yet this quirk is part of the car's charm. It reflects both Hudson's ingenuity in rebranding and its reliance on borrowed technology in its final year. The transmission gave the Hornet Hollywood a hidden touch of Cadillac refinement, even if the rest of the car's flamboyant design suggested something else entirely. Fact number 18. Shares engine with the Rebel muscle car. One of the strangest ironies of the 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood is that under its flamboyant, somewhat awkward body, it carried the very same engine that powered one of the earliest American muscle cars. The car in question was the Rambler Rebel, a lightweight midsize offering from AMC that shocked the industry by stuffing the new 327 cubic inch V8 into a much smaller and lighter body. That combination gave the Rebel startling performance for its time, rivaling and even surpassing many V8 Chevrolets and Fords at the drag strip. What makes this connection so unusual is the contrast in image between the two cars. The Rebel was marketed as youthful, aggressive, and modern, often credited by historians as a precursor to the muscle car movement that would dominate the 1960s. 0.5. The Hudson Hornet Hollywood, by contrast, was marketed with tritone paint, chrome finlets, and reclining twin travel beds. One was a street brawler in disguise, while the other was a flamboyant cruiser struggling to find its place in a shrinking market. Yet both cars relied on the exact same 327 V8 heart. This dual identity created a strange legacy. On paper, the Hornet Hollywood should have been every bit as exciting as the Rebel. It had the power to match, but its heavier body and softer marketing made it feel less like a performer and more like a lounge on wheels. Buyers looking for thrills flocked to the Rebel, while the Hollywood's muscle potential was largely overlooked. In effect, the same engine became both a pioneer of performance and a footnote in a car remembered more for its style oddities than for speed. Today, collectors love pointing out this weird overlap. When someone peers under the hood of a 1957 Hornet Hollywood and sees the 327 V8, they're looking at the same mechanical DNA that helped launch the muscle car era. It's an odd twist of fate that the final Hudson shared its heart with one of AMC's boldest innovations, linking the end of one brand with the beginning of a whole new performance culture. Fact number 17, brand new AMC V8 engine. For the 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood, the beating heart was something completely new. American Motors' freshly developed 327 cubic inch V8 engine. This was a critical milestone because unlike the earlier Hudsons of the mid-1950s that had borrowed Packard engines or smaller Nash V8s, this was the first time Hudson could claim an engine built fully in-house by AMC. The company had poured resources into developing this power plant at its Kenosha plant, and the Hornet Hollywood became one of the first cars to showcase it. The numbers were impressive for the time. With a 4-barrel carburetor and dual exhausts, the engine produced around 255 horsepower, which gave the Hollywood a level of performance that far outstripped its 6-cylinder predecessors. For Hudson, a brand once known for its championship-winning inline sixes, it marked a dramatic break with tradition, but also a leap into the horsepower wars of the late 1950s. What made this detail especially weird was the mismatch between the powerful new engine and the rest of the car's character. The Hornet Hollywood was heavy, ornate, and marketed more for comfort and flash than for speed. Underneath all that chrome and color, however, lurked a genuinely modern V8 that could hold its own against Ford's Thunderbird or Chevrolet's Bel Air V8s. It gave the car a hidden muscle that few buyers ever fully appreciated. Ironically, the same engine would go on to gain more fame in another AMC product, the Rambler Rebel, often cited as one of the earliest muscle cars. This meant that while the Hornet Hollywood looked like a fading relic of the past, it shared its heart with a groundbreaking performance car. Collectors today see this as one of the Hollywood's most fascinating contradictions, a car mocked for its styling excesses, but carrying an engine that pointed toward the future of American performance. In its final year, Hudson was unknowingly laying the groundwork for the muscle car era, even if its own model wouldn't live to see it. Fact number 16, no 6-cylinder option. Perhaps the strangest twist in the story of the 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood is that it broke completely with the tradition that had made Hudson famous. For the first time in the history of the Hornet, there was no 6-cylinder engine option at all. This might not sound dramatic today, but for a brand that had built its reputation on the legendary twin-H power inline six, it was an astonishing shift. Back in the early 1950s, the Hudson Hornet 6-cylinder was nearly unbeatable on the NASCAR tracks, powering the brand to championships and solidifying its reputation as the car that could beat the V8s. Fans loved the combination of durability, torque, and balance that the step-down chassis and the inline six delivered. But by 1957, American Motors had made the decision to phase out the old engines entirely, replacing them with its brand new V8s. For the Hollywood, that meant every single car came with a V8, leaving traditionalists shocked that the 6-cylinder heritage had simply vanished. The decision was partly driven by the market. By the late 1950s, buyers equated V8 power with prestige, and Hudson's inline six, no matter how proven, looked outdated on paper. Yet the irony was rich. The very engine that had once made Hudson a giant killer was abandoned in its final model year. Some historians even argue this alienated longtime Hudson loyalists who might have tolerated the badge engineering with Nash if they could at least still order their beloved 6-cylinder. Today, this detail makes the 1957 Hornet Hollywood stand apart in a strange way. It was the only Hornet ever sold without its trademark 6-cylinder, a car that carried the name but not the mechanical soul of its predecessors. Collectors often see it as both fascinating and bittersweet, a sign of the times, when V8 horsepower was king and Hudson's racing pedigree was quietly erased in favor of conformity. In hindsight, the absence of the 6-cylinder was more than a technical change. It was a symbolic farewell to everything that had once made Hudson unique. Fact number 15, Weather Eye Climate System. The 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood may have been mocked for its styling excesses, but hidden beneath all the chrome and tritone paint was one of the most advanced comfort features of its day, the Weather Eye Climate System. Originally developed by Nash in the 1930s and perfected through the 1940s, the Weather-Eye was the first truly effective fresh air heating and ventilation setup offered in an American car. When Hudson merged with Nash under American Motors, the system carried over to the Hornet, making it one of the last major Hudsons to quietly enjoy a world-class engineering advantage. Unlike the crude heaters of most rivals, which simply blew hot air from under the dash, the Weather-Eye used outside air drawn in through a cowl vent, passed it over a heat exchanger, and then circulated it evenly throughout the cabin. This created a steady flow of fresh, warm air instead of the stale, recirculated stuff most cars provided. On cold mornings, the system also helped keep windows clear, reducing the fogging and icing that plagued drivers of other brands. Hudson proudly marketed this as part of its double-safe single-unit construction, suggesting it wasn't just about comfort, but about safety and visibility too. The odd thing is how few buyers actually knew what they had. While GM and Ford were still years away from refining their heating and ventilation to the same degree, many Hudson owners assumed every car worked this way. The Weather-Eye was almost too subtle. It didn't scream for attention like fins or chrome, but once you drove with it, you realized how much better it made winter driving. Today, car historians point to the Weather-Eye as one of those quiet innovations that outlived the Hudson name itself. It was a piece of Nash engineering brilliance disguised under Hudson's fading badge, proof that the Hornet Hollywood wasn't just about flamboyant styling, but also about genuine advances in comfort. In a final twist of irony, a brand best remembered for flashy paint and odd proportions was also carrying one of the smartest and most forward-thinking climate systems of its time. Fact number 14, power steering and brakes. By the late 1950s, luxury and convenience were beginning to mean more than raw horsepower, and the 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood tried to keep up by offering power steering and power brakes. While these features seem ordinary today, in 1957 they were still optional equipment on many cars, especially outside the premium market. For Hudson, a brand that had once built its reputation on engineering toughness and racing victories, the pivot to comfort technology was both logical and a little ironic. Power steering was a major draw for buyers who dreaded wrestling with a heavy steering wheel, especially on a car as wide and solidly built as the Hornet. It allowed smoother maneuvering in tight spaces and made the Hollywood feel more manageable in city traffic. Power brakes, meanwhile, reduced the effort needed to bring the car to a stop, a convenience that also doubled as a subtle safety advantage. Both of these systems borrowed heavily from technology already developed by larger automakers, but for Hudson, they represented a leap forward in making its final car feel modern. What makes this fact particularly weird is how these conveniences sat alongside Hudson's otherwise desperate cost-cutting. The Hollywood shared its basic platform and many components with Nash, a fact that alienated some traditional Hudson fans. Yet, instead of stripping the car bare, AMC chose to sprinkle in features like power steering and brakes to give it a veneer of sophistication. This odd mix of frugality and luxury meant that some Hollywoods rolled out with little more than chrome and vinyl, while others were surprisingly well-equipped, bordering on luxury car territory. Collectors today often note how rare it is to find a Hollywood with both power options intact. Many buyers in 1957 were unwilling to pay extra for a Hudson brand, already seen as fading. So few fully loaded cars were built. Those that do survive demonstrate the strange dual identity of the Hornet Hollywood, a car caught between its racing past and its attempt to reinvent itself as a comfortable, almost pampering personal car. Fact number 13. First Hudson with factory AC. Air conditioning may seem like an ordinary feature today, but in the 1950s, it was a rare luxury reserved for only the most expensive cars. The 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood stood out because it was the first Hudson ever to offer factory-installed air conditioning, branded as all-season air conditioning. This was a bold step for a brand that was already on its last legs, attempting to show that it could compete with the technological refinements of the big three automakers. The system was trunk-mounted and used ducts to circulate cooled air into the passenger cabin. Unlike modern systems, which are compact and integrated, this early AC setup required heavy equipment and added significant cost to the already expensive Hornet Hollywood. Buyers who wanted the feature had to pay a steep premium, often pushing the price of their Hudson into Cadillac territory. For a company that was struggling to move even a few thousand cars, the option was aspirational rather than practical. What makes this detail so strange is how few people actually ordered it. Only a tiny fraction of 1957 Hudsons left the factory with A, C, making survivors with intact systems among the rarest of all Hudson artifacts. Many dealers didn't even bother to stock the option, assuming that buyers interested in such a luxury would choose a Cadillac, Buick, or Chrysler instead. But for the handful of Hollywoods that did receive it, the feature made them cutting-edge examples of comfort technology at a time when most Americans were still cranking down their windows. Today, collectors prize any Hornet Hollywood that can be documented as having original air conditioning. Restoring such a system is a challenge, since parts are scarce and many units were removed over the decades when they failed. Yet the fact remains, in its final year, Hudson quietly joined the small club of automakers that could boast factory A, C. It was an odd mixture of ambition and desperation, an advanced feature in a dying brand, making the Hornet Hollywood both ahead of its time and out of step with its shrinking customer base. Fact number 12, the drive-in date car. If there was one cultural trend that defined teenage life in the 1950s, it was the rise of the drive-in theater. Cars weren't just transportation, they were social spaces, private lounges, and even status symbols. The 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood leaned right into this cultural wave, earning itself the nickname of the drive-in date car. It wasn't just a random label. Hudson's own marketing made sly suggestions that the Hollywood's unique features were tailor-made for young couples looking for both comfort and privacy. The secret weapon, of course, was the fold-flat twin travel bed seating. With a few simple adjustments, the wide front seats could recline back to meet the rear bench, turning the entire cabin into a soft, cushioned lounge. For long road trips, this was pitched as a convenience, but at a drive-in, it was something else entirely. Period advertisements even hinted that no car was better for watching the stars or the screen than the Hudson Hornet Hollywood. What makes this fact especially quirky is how open Hudson was about it. In an era when most automakers carefully avoided anything that might seem risque, Hudson was essentially winking at its buyers. The Hollywood wasn't being marketed as a family sedan, nor as a serious performance car. It was being marketed as a stylish companion for fun nights out. It's hard to imagine Ford or Chevrolet running ads that all but admitted their car doubled as a mobile date spot, yet Hudson embraced the idea. Today, this reputation has only added to the car's legend. Collectors and enthusiasts often laugh about how the Hornet Hollywood became a kind of cultural artifact, embodying both the excess of its design and the playful spirit of 1950s youth culture. It may not have saved Hudson's sales, but by leaning into America's love affair with drive-ins, the Hornet Hollywood earned itself a quirky, unforgettable identity. Fact number 11, reclining twin travel beds. One of the strangest and most ingenious features of the 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood was its ability to transform into a makeshift bedroom on wheels. Thanks to engineering carried over from Nash, the Hollywood's wide front bench seats could recline almost flat, aligning with the rear bench to create what Hudson proudly advertised as twin travel beds. This was decades before minivans or SUVs popularized fold-flat seating, making it a futuristic and quirky feature for its time. The mechanism was relatively simple, yet highly effective. By adjusting the seatbacks, both the driver's and passenger seats could fold down, forming a continuous cushioned space that extended nearly the length of the cabin. Families were encouraged to use it for long trips, letting passengers rest during overnight drives. But period advertisements also leaned into the idea of romance, suggesting that the Hollywood was the perfect drive-in date car. In an era when drive-in theaters were cultural hubs, this feature became both practical and playful. What makes this detail even weirder is how openly Hudson promoted it. While most automakers focused on horsepower, fins, and chrome, Hudson's brochures casually highlighted that your car could double as a bed. For a brand struggling to remain relevant, this was a bold attempt to stand out by appealing to the daily lifestyle of buyers. It wasn't about racing heritage or flashy tail fins. It was about comfort, intimacy, and a hint of fun. Today, collectors love demonstrating this quirk at car shows. Enthusiasts often fold down the seats to show curious onlookers how a 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood could literally replace a motel room in a pinch. It's a feature so unusual that many first assume it was an aftermarket gimmick, not a factory-engineered design. Yet it speaks volumes about Hudson's willingness to think outside the box in its final days, offering a unique blend of practicality and novelty that remains one of the car's most endearing oddities. Fact number 10. Continental Kit Option. Among the oddest accessories offered for the 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood was the optional Continental Kit, a dealer-installed spare tire carrier that transformed the entire look of the car. This wasn't just a small add-on, it was a massive extension that mounted the spare wheel and a hard metal cover onto the rear bumper, stretching the car's length by nearly a foot. The idea was to evoke luxury, giving the Hollywood the proportions of a limousine or a custom-built show car. Continental kits had become something of a craze in the mid-1950s, inspired by the Lincoln Continental of the late 1940s, which had carried its spare wheel externally at the rear. By the time Hudson offered it, the accessory had already become a symbol of flamboyance, seen more on customized cars than factory offerings. AMC's decision to make it available on the Hollywood reflects just how desperate the company was to appeal to buyers who craved flash. In practice, the Continental Kit was more about image than practicality. The extended rear made parking more difficult, and the added weight hung awkwardly on the bumper. Yet for the small handful of buyers who opted for it, the kit made their Hornet Hollywood look dramatically different from anything else on the road. A tritone painted Hollywood with aluminum trim and a Continental spare was about as close as Hudson ever got to producing a rolling fashion statement in 1957. What makes this accessory particularly weird is its rarity. Few customers were willing to pay extra for a Hudson in its final year, let alone spend additional money on a flamboyant spare tire carrier. That means surviving Hornet Hollywoods with an original Continental kit are exceptionally scarce, often treated as curiosities, even within the Hudson community. The option stands today as a symbol of a brand trying to keep up with trends by literally adding length and spectacle, even as the company itself was shortening its time on the market. Fact number 9. Signature aluminum side panels. Among the many unusual touches on the 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood, one of the most overlooked yet fascinating was the use of textured aluminum side panels on the custom models. At first glance, these inserts look like just another piece of chrome flash in a year obsessed with ornamentation. But unlike typical chrome-plated steel trim, these panels were actually made of lightweight aluminum, which meant they would not rust or tarnish the way other brightwork often did. The panels ran along the front fenders and into the doors, providing a silver accent that broke up the body's color scheme. On tritone cars, the aluminum acted almost like a dividing line between clashing shades, making the car look more coordinated than it otherwise might have. Hudson's brochures even touted this feature as a mark of distinction, a way of suggesting that their trim had both style and durability. It was a rare example of a decorative element that carried a practical advantage, even if buyers never noticed. What makes this detail especially weird is how inconsistent it was across the line. Only the higher-end custom models received the aluminum treatment, while the more affordable super versions had to settle for painted or simpler chrome accents. In other words, the panels became an easy way to spot a custom Hollywood at a glance. But because so few Hollywoods were produced overall, and even fewer in custom trim, surviving examples with intact aluminum panels are extremely rare today. Collectors who restore these cars often remark on how challenging it is to find replacement panels. Unlike chrome, aluminum doesn't respond well to replating, and the textured pattern used by Hudson was unique to that year. This means that every original panel that survives carries an authenticity that cannot be easily replicated. In a way, the aluminum trim symbolizes Hudson's final attempt to stand apart, an independent company adding a subtle but unusual material twist in its swan song year. For a car that often leaned on borrowed Nash bones, the signature aluminum panels gave the Hornet Hollywood at least one genuinely distinctive fingerprint. Fact number 8. Enormous V-grille. If there is one styling cue that instantly defines the 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood, it is the massive, almost cartoonish V-grille that dominated the front end. Instead of a subtle opening for airflow, Hudson's designers plastered the Hollywood's nose with a full-width die-cast egg crate grille shaped into a deep V, punctuated right in the center by a giant chrome V emblem. This was not just a design flourish, it was also a loud proclamation that the car carried the new American Motors V8 under the hood. The effect, however, was divisive. To some, the grille gave the Hornet Hollywood a bold, modern face that was hard to ignore. To others, it looked overwrought, like a caricature of 50s styling excess. Contemporary reviewers often commented that the front end seemed too busy, as if the designers had been unwilling to choose a single theme and instead threw in everything they could. Between the oversized emblem, the aggressive V-shape, and the textured egg crate background, the Hollywood's nose was more spectacle than elegance. What makes this grille especially weird is that it didn't truly fit the rest of the car. The body itself was based on the more conservative Nash Ambassador, a shape with rounded contours and restrained sheet metal. Slapping such an enormous chrome grille onto that shell gave the Hornet Hollywood a mismatched personality, like pairing a tuxedo jacket with beach shorts. Yet AMC seemed convinced that this was the way to stand out in showrooms, particularly as fins and flash were defining Detroit's latest models. Today, collectors often joke that you could spot a 1957 Hornet Hollywood from 2 blocks away just by its grille alone. It was Hudson's attempt at bravado in a year when the brand was fading fast, a chrome billboard announcing power and presence, even as sales dwindled. The grille may not have saved Hudson, but it ensured the Hollywood would never be forgotten, cementing its place in history as one of the strangest and most audacious faces ever bolted onto an American automobile. Fact number 7. Mini tail fins and finlets. By 1957, tail fins had become the ultimate automotive fashion statement, and every manufacturer seemed determined to outdo the next with bigger and bolder fins. Cadillac was leading the charge with towering chrome-trimmed blades, while Chrysler's forward-look cars wore sleek, jet-inspired fins. Hudson, however, found itself in an awkward position. It didn't have the money or engineering resources to design massive new fins for its Hornet Hollywood. Instead, AMC's designers improvised by bolting on small chrome ornaments that look like miniature fins. These little accents, sometimes called finlets, perched atop the rounded rear quarter panels. They were purely decorative, serving no aerodynamic function, but they gave Hudson salesmen something to point to when customers inevitably asked, "Where are the fins?" At the same time, the front fenders sprouted twin chromed fin ornaments, standing almost like antennae or miniature wings. Together, these elements made the Hornet Hollywood look both flashy and faintly comical, as if AMC was desperately trying to play catch-up with Detroit's styling war using off-the-shelf trim pieces. The effect was polarizing. Some buyers appreciated the effort, saying it gave the car a bit of flair without going overboard, while others derided the finlets as cheap imitations of what Chrysler and GM were doing more convincingly. Because they were add-on elements rather than fully integrated bodywork, the finlets sometimes looked tacked on, like costume jewelry pinned to an evening gown. Even in 1957, critics noted that the design felt behind the times. Ironically, these tiny fins are now one of the most distinctive features of the Hornet Hollywood. In a sea of cars with massive tail fins, the Hudson stands out for having chosen the miniature route, almost as if it was mocking the trend while still trying to participate. Today, when collectors stumble across a Hornet Hollywood, those chrome finlets are often the first detail that sparks conversation, serving as a quirky reminder of how Hudson's final styling flourishes were more about theater than innovation. Fact number 6. Padded dash for safety. One of the strangest and most overlooked details about the 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood is that it was quietly among the earliest American cars to embrace padded interiors in the name of safety. At a time when most manufacturers still treated safety as an afterthought, Hudson fitted every Hornet, whether super or custom, with a padded dashboard and padded sun visors as standard equipment. It may sound minor today, but in the context of the 1950s, this was nothing short of radical. The idea was to soften the blow in case of a collision, since steel dashboards and hard sun visors often cause serious head injuries and accidents. This came just a few years after Ford's short-lived lifeguard design campaign in 1956, which introduced similar concepts but was largely ignored by the buying public. Hudson, operating under the American Motors umbrella, decided to push forward anyway, making padded interiors a quiet selling point of the Hornet Hollywood. What makes this weird is that AMC didn't trumpet the feature nearly as loudly as it could have. Brochures mentioned the double-safe single-unit construction and the padding, but the marketing leaned far more heavily on tritone paint and chrome fins. It was as if Hudson was embarrassed to talk about safety at a time when buyers wanted flash, speed, and glamour. The padded dash was there, making the Hollywood a safer car than most of its rivals, but it lived in the shadows of the styling excess. In hindsight, this obscure feature gave the Hornet Hollywood a strangely modern edge. Safety pads, collapsible steering columns, and seatbelts would all become standard in the following decade. But in 1957, Hudson was already experimenting with these ideas. For a brand that was about to vanish, it was a final flicker of engineering foresight. Today, if you find a survivor, that padded dash may look cracked and faded, but it tells a weird story. Even in its last year, Hudson was quietly ahead of its time in ways buyers hardly noticed. Fact number 5. Coordinated tricolor interior. If the exterior of the 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood was flamboyant, the interior doubled down on that spectacle. Hudson didn't simply stop at tritone paint jobs on the outside. It carried the same philosophy inside the cabin, creating some of the wildest factory interiors of the 1950s. Buyers who chose a flashy tritone exterior would step into a cockpit upholstered in tricolor fabrics and vinyls, designed to match or complement the body paint. This was not subtle coordination, it was deliberate color theater, designed to give the illusion of a fully custom-built car right off the assembly line. The fabrics themselves were unusual for the era. Hudson offered cloth with metallic threads woven into it, shimmering under showroom lights. Combined with high-contrast vinyl bolsters and optional genuine leather trim in the custom version. Even the padded dashboard and visors, which were touted as new safety features, could be ordered in hues that matched the broader palette. It was as though Hudson's design department wanted every surface, from door panels to seat backs, to tell a color story. While this gave the Hollywood a unique personality, it also puzzled buyers who were more accustomed to conservative interiors of the time. Chevrolet or Ford might offer a two-tone bench seat at most, but Hudson was giving you 3 colors, metallic threads, and fabrics that seemed more at home in a mid-century living room than in an automobile. Some critics dismissed it as garish, while others praised Hudson for injecting personality into a car that otherwise shared its bones with Nash. The strangest part is how few of these interiors survived intact. Sunlight, wear, and fading destroyed many of the original tricolor schemes, making unrestored examples almost impossible to find today. Yet for those lucky enough to step into a preserved Hudson Hornet Hollywood, the cabin feels like entering a time capsule of 1957 optimism, where color was used as a weapon against obsolescence. In truth, these interiors were Hudson's way of saying, we may not build many cars anymore, but we'll make sure the ones we do build refuse to be ignored. Fact number 4. Tritone paint extravaganza. One of the most bizarre and little-remembered quirks of the 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood was its kaleidoscopic approach to color. While most American cars of the era offered two-tone paint schemes at best, Hudson took things to an extreme by offering not just solids and two-tones, but also 5 official factory tritone combinations. Buyers could literally walk into a dealership and order a Hornet Hollywood that looked as though it had been dipped in 3 different buckets of paint. The tritone palette wasn't subtle either. Shades such as Mardi Gras Red, Avocado, Sierra Peach, and Frost White could all be paired together, creating rolling works of automotive art that seemed designed to be noticed from blocks away. In a time when fins, chrome, and flash were already dominating American streets, the Hudson Hornet Hollywood pushed visual flamboyance one step further. The company promoted these bold choices as a way to stand apart, hoping that sheer spectacle could compensate for dwindling brand recognition. What makes this fact especially weird is how carefully Hudson tied the interiors to match. If you chose a tri-tone exterior, the Hollywood's interior came in a tri-color scheme keyed to those very paints, with fabric inserts, vinyl bolsters, and even metallic threads woven into the seats. Hudson was trying to deliver a kind of custom car feel straight from the factory, a strategy almost unheard of for a company fighting for survival. It was an extravagant touch that AMC hoped would draw buyers into showrooms, even if it added complexity to production. The irony is that this extravagance came in Hudson's final year. While Detroit's giants like Chevrolet and Ford were producing cars by the hundreds of thousands, Hudson offered fewer than 5,000 total Hornets in 1957. That means the tri-tone Hudson Hornet Hollywoods are among the rarest color experiments of the 1950s, making surviving examples almost mythical today. In hindsight, the tri-tone paint program was both a last gasp of creativity and a symbol of how out of step Hudson had become, with a market that was moving toward bigger fins, bigger chrome, and eventually, compact ramblers. Fact number 3. Polarizing design reputation. The 1957 Hudson Hornet Hollywood is remembered less for what it accomplished and more for how it looked, because its styling divided opinion more sharply than almost any car of its era. On one side, some collectors insist the Hollywood was a bold attempt to capture the chrome-hungry spirit of the late 50s. On the other, critics have gone so far as to call it one of the ugliest American cars ever made, a hodgepodge of fins, grills, and ornaments that looked less like a unified design and more like a scrapbook of trends. Part of the problem came from the fact that Hudson no longer had its own design studios. The Hollywood's body shell was borrowed from the Nash Ambassador, and AMC's designers simply added layers of trim to try to make it stand apart. The result was a front end dominated by an enormous chrome V, set in an egg crate grille paired with twin chromed ornaments perched on top of each fender. At the rear, small chrome finlets sprouted awkwardly, as if AMC wanted to participate in the tail fin craze but didn't quite know how to commit. The tri-tone paint schemes made the car even louder. A Hollywood could be ordered in shades like turquoise, coral, and cream, all on one body, creating a look that some saw as flamboyant and others as downright gaudy. Inside, the matching tricolor upholstery continued the theme, meaning the car shouted its presence, whether it was parked or in motion. To some buyers, this made the Hollywood glamorous, but to others, it looked like a desperate attempt to grab attention. Decades later, this design controversy remains part of the car's legend. At car shows, people either smile at its outlandish styling or shake their heads in disbelief. Few vehicles so perfectly capture the mid-century clash between restrained elegance and over-the-top flash. The Hudson Hornet Hollywood of 1957 might not have won beauty contests, but it secured a place in automotive history as a car that dared to look different, even if that difference split the crowd right down the middle. Fact number 2. Hash under the skin. By the time the Hudson Hornet Hollywood appeared in 1957, it was a Hudson in name only. Underneath the bold chrome, the tail ornaments, and the Hollywood badge, the car was really just a Nash Ambassador that had been dressed up with Hudson trim. After Hudson and Nash were merged into American Motors in 1954, the new company could not afford to engineer two completely separate cars. The result was a line of Hudsons that were essentially badge-engineered Nashes, sharing the same platform, suspension, drivetrain, and even much of the body. Car enthusiasts quickly caught on to this quiet rebadging and gave these hybrids an unflattering nickname, the Hash, short for half Hudson and half Nash. For loyal Hudson buyers who had once bragged about step-down chassis designs and twin-H-power six-cylinder engines, this was a bitter pill. What had once been an independent automaker with its own engineering department was now reduced to borrowing clothes from its corporate cousin. Yet AMC management insisted this was the only way Hudson could survive, even if the cars looked more like Nashes with new badges than true Hudsons. What made this weird was how far AMC went to disguise the truth. The Hornet Hollywood received extra chrome spears, different taillights, and a gaudy grille with a big V in the middle, all in an effort to create a distinct identity. But to the trained eye, the family resemblance to the Nash Ambassador was impossible to hide. In fact, if you parked the two side by side, most of the sheet metal lined up perfectly, and the door panels were interchangeable. This badge engineering wasn't just a quirk of corporate efficiency, It symbolized the end of Hudson as a real automaker. The Hornet Hollywood may have been marketed as glamorous, but its bones told another story. Hudson had been absorbed, repainted, and sent back out to face a public that was increasingly skeptical. That hidden truth that the last Hudsons were really Nashes in disguise remains one of the strangest and least flattering chapters in American car history. Fact number 1, final year exclusive. In 1957, the Hudson Hornet Hollywood carried the strange distinction of being both a star and a ghost at the very same time. It was the final year that the Hudson brand would exist as an automobile nameplate, and the Hornet was the sole model that could be purchased under the Hudson badge. The lineup was shockingly small. Buyers could choose only between a 4-door sedan or the sleek 2-door Hollywood hardtop coupe, and each came in just 2 trims, the Super or the Custom. For a company that only a few years earlier offered multiple body styles, specialty editions, and a broad catalog of engines, this collapse to a single model was almost eerie. The Hollywood name itself had been introduced earlier in the decade to evoke glamour and West Coast sophistication, but by 1957, it felt like a stage name being used in a play with no audience. Dealers were left with only these 2 choices to showcase, and customers were puzzled to see a Hudson showroom that looked like it had been stripped down to bare essentials. It was a sharp contrast to the step-down era of Hudson's early 50s dominance, when NASCAR victories and bold engineering gave the brand a sense of invincibility. Now, the Hollywood was a thinly disguised Nash ambassador with Hudson badges, reduced to playing a bit part in American Motors' survival strategy. What makes this even weirder is that the 2 trims themselves were not dramatically different. The Super was fairly plain, while the Custom received some additional chrome, better fabrics, and options for tri-tone paint, but both were built on the same bones and carried the same new AMC V8. It was almost as if Hudson was giving buyers the illusion of choice, while quietly signaling that the brand was nearing its final curtain. Car historians often look at 1957 as Hudson's last gasp, and the Hornet Hollywood as its swan song, an automobile that carried a name dripping with glamour, yet rolled into showrooms with the melancholy air of a farewell performance.